Welcome to part 5 of our lecture series on chapter 3, Biology and Behavior. So now I want to talk about the subcortical structures. And these are structures that are in the middle of the brain. So we're going to look at the limbic system. And the limbic system is the hypothalamus, thalamus, amygdala, hippocampus, and the basal ganglia. So here we can see that the limbic system is in the middle of the brain. This would be the right hemisphere of the brain right here. And this is what the limbic system would look like if we severed the left hemisphere. And this gives you a look at the structures of the limbic system. Hypothalamus, thalamus, the hippocampus, the amygdala. Doesn't have the basal ganglia on this one. So first I want to talk about the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is often referred to as the brain within a brain because it regulates so much of our physiological processing. It's this teeny tiny little structure, but it regulates the autonomic nervous system, the automatic nervous system, our endocrine system, so our hormone system, and our circadian rhythms, which is our body clock. Now, when we get to chapter 4, we'll talk a lot about circadian rhythms. The hypothalamus plays a key role in motivation and emotion. Now, when I say motivation, I'm not talking about, oh God, I don't want to listen to lectures. I'm talking about motivated behaviors such as eating, such as engaging in sexual behavior, motivated behaviors that keeps our species surviving and reproducing. And the hypothalamus is part of the reward system of the brain. So, the hypothalamus is right in here. It's this orange structure. It's tucked under the thalamus. Then we get to the thalamus, and this is the gateway to the brain. This works like a cell phone tower. It's a switchboard that organizes input from sensory organs, so your eyes, your auditory receivers within the ear, the inner ear, your skin, and your, what's the fourth one that I'm thinking of? Taste. Now, it does not receive information from the olfactory nerve, your smell organs. Smell is processed differently, but your other four senses send sensory receptors in these sensory organs send information to the thalamus, and the thalamus receives that information and routes them to the appropriate areas of the brain. So it's just like a cell phone tower. You make a phone call, the cell phone tower receives the information, and then it routes your call to the appropriate phone number of the person you're trying to reach. The thalamus is part of our consciousness system, and we'll talk more about that in chapter 4, but the thalamus regulates awareness and attention, which are necessary for consciousness, motivation, and also the emotional aspect of memory. I will talk more about the emotional aspects of memory when we talk about the amygdala. So, the hypothalamus is right here in orange. This purple structure is the thalamus. It's quite large. And now we're going to talk about the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is your main memory system. Something we need to keep in mind is that no one structure is responsible for one aspect of the human experience. As we look at the brain, I need you to know what each structure is responsible for, but we need to keep in context that we need a whole healthy brain to have the whole human experience. So the hippocampus is your primary memory system. It is critical for forming, storing, and retrieving memories. It can increase in size with increased use. And we'll look at that more in a moment. It's key for spatial memory. So when you're driving home from wherever you're at, you need your hippocampus to get you where you're going. It helps you understand where things are in space, and it organizes that information. Now, neurogenesis was first discovered in the hippocampus, and neurogenesis is the growth of new neurons. And that was first discovered in the hippocampus. And so when we see that the hippocampus can increase in size with increased use, this is tied to neurogenesis and also to neural pathways, changes in the number of synapses. Please watch the video titled London Taxi Drivers, and you'll find this video in Chapter 3, Biology and Behavior lecture videos. Welcome back. I think that video is fascinating. This is a great example of neurogenesis, and this increased in size in a part of the hippocampus responsible for spatial memory. So that's also going to be the growth of new neural pathways or strengthening of existing neural pathways. And part of strengthening would be an increase in the number of synapses. See, there was an actual reason why I had you learn about the structures of the neuron and synaptic transmission. So here we see both hippocampi. So each hemisphere of the brain is separated. It's joined together by another structure we'll talk about. But the hippocampus branches into both hemispheres. So you actually have two of them. So we've talked about the hypothalamus, this orange structure right here underneath the thalamus. The thalamus, right here in purple. And here we just talked about the hippocampus, which is critical for memory. And then we get to the amygdala. I'm really fascinated by the amygdala. It's such a small little structure, but it does so much. I'm actually fascinated by the entire limbic system. We have these tiny little structures, but they motivate and organize the human experience. So the amygdala is the emotional center of the brain, especially for fear and aggression. Now, the amygdala works with other emotions as well, but whenever you have a fight, flight, or freeze response, that is your fear system kicking in. And so the amygdala becomes intensely active during the fight, flight, or freeze experience. And it organizes motivational and emotional response patterns. Check my next slide. The amygdala links memories with their emotional content. The hippocampus and the amygdala work together to give you full memories. And so when we need to remember our last birthday, we need information from the hippocampus, from the amygdala, and other parts of the brain too. But let's just look at the amygdala and the hippocampus. The hippocampus stores the content. The amygdala stores the emotions linked to that content. And so these two structures have to send information to the frontal lobe so that the puzzle of that memory can be solved. So memories are extraordinarily complicated because they're processed in so many parts of the brain. When we are looking at the limbic system, the amygdala is where the emotions of your memories are stored. The hippocampus is where the story of your memory is stored. Now, as I mentioned, the amygdala intensifies memory function during periods of intense physiological arousal. It also helps you understand, helps you analyze the facial expressions that others are showing. So it's very hard for us to hide our emotions in our facial responses. And the amygdala helps you read what the face sees and interprets the emotion of that facial expression. That makes it critical for us to be social beings. We have to become good at reading other people's facial emotions in order to have relationships or to interact with strangers as well. Let me check. So we've got the amygdala right here. Now, something that's really fascinating about the amygdala, because my area is temperament and personality, I am fascinated by disorders of personality. And there's one disorder of personality called antisocial personality disorder. So sometimes you'll hear these people will be referred to as sociopaths or psychopaths. I believe psychopathy exists on a spectrum. Many psychologists do, with antisocial personality disorder being the mild version of psychopathy, sociopathy being the moderate form of psychopathy, and psychopathy being the extreme on the spectrum of antisocial personality disorder. Something that has been found is that those with antisocial personality disorder, or with psychopathy, have smaller amygdalas. Now, this is interesting because one of the key symptoms of psychopathy, antisocial personality disorder, is a lack of empathy. They're not able to empathize with anyone except themselves. They're also, their fear response is very blunted, that fight, flight, or freeze system. They don't experience fear like the rest of us do, which is one reason why their empathy system is broken. So they don't feel a lot of fear, which makes them bold. Their amygdala isn't able to give them the emotions necessary to restrain them from antisocial behaviors. Okay, so hypothalamus, thalamus, hippocampus, and the amygdala. Next we get to the basal ganglia. Now, these are subcortical structures that are important for the planning and production of movement. So we've got the basal ganglia right here in blue. It's a fairly large structure. And it's also part of the reward system. So the limbic system is critical to reward, which makes it critical to motivation. Then you have the nucleus accumbens, which is part of the reward system and slow wave sleep. And so I don't believe this shows this slide doesn't show the nucleus accumbens. So this is another example of how the limbic system controls reward. Several structures in the limbic system are also necessary for sleep. Okay, so as we continue on with lectures, I'm going to help tie all this together. Right now, I'm just looking at the specific puzzle pieces. this will, once we start talking about the cerebral cortex, I'll be putting all of this information together so that you have an actual idea of how the hell does this all work? Because I think you're probably having those questions now. So we will pick up in part 6.